Have you ever gone through a season in life where everything suddenly felt harder? Not just a little difficult, but strangely difficult. Doors that once opened easily now seem to remain closed. Plans you worked so hard for suddenly fall apart. Opportunities disappear at the last moment. And sometimes it feels as if something invisible is pushing against you, slowing you down, blocking your progress. You begin to wonder what is happening. You ask questions in the quiet moments of the night. Why is everything going wrong? Why does life feel like a constant struggle? Did I do something wrong? In those moments, it is easy to believe that you are fighting your battles alone. It can feel as though the weight of every problem is resting entirely on your shoulders. But the Bible reveals something extraordinary about the nature of life. Something that most people forget. Something that changes the way we see our struggles. There are battles happening that we cannot see. Not every conflict in life is visible. Not every struggle happens in the physical world. Some battles take place behind the scenes of our lives, beyond the reach of our eyes, and beyond the limits of our understanding. And in many of those battles, God Himself is fighting for you. Think about that for a moment. While you are simply trying to make it through the day, while you are worrying about your future, while you are praying quietly and hoping things will somehow work out, there may be a divine battle unfolding on your behalf. A battle where God is protecting your path. A battle where God is blocking dangers you cannot see. A battle where God is moving pieces in ways that will only make sense later. The truth is that many of the greatest victories in your life may come from battles you never even knew existed. There is a fascinating story in the Bible that illustrates this perfectly. One night, a prophet prayed that God would open the eyes of his servant. The servant had been terrified because an enemy army had surrounded the city. From his perspective, defeat seemed certain. There was nowhere to run, no chance of survival. But when God opened his eyes, the servant saw something astonishing. The hills around them were filled with heavenly forces protecting them. What had looked like a hopeless situation was actually a moment of hidden protection. The battle had already been won. The servant simply couldn't see it yet. And sometimes life works the same way. We look at our problems and believe we are surrounded. We look at our circumstances and assume the worst. We see the obstacles, the delays, the disappointments, and the closed doors. But what we cannot see is the unseen protection that may be surrounding us. We cannot see the battles God may already be fighting on our behalf. We cannot see the dangers He may already be removing from our path. There are moments in life when things do not work out the way we hoped. A relationship ends. A job opportunity disappears. A plan collapses after months or even years of effort. At the time, these moments feel painful and confusing. We often interpret them as failures. But sometimes they are something very different. Sometimes they are moments when God is quietly intervening. Sometimes the closed door that frustrates you today may actually be the door that protects you tomorrow. Sometimes the delay that tests your patience is actually giving you time to avoid something you were never meant to face. Sometimes the struggle you are experiencing right now is part of a battle that God is already fighting for you. But because these battles are invisible, we rarely recognize them while they are happening. We see only the surface of the situation. We see the problem. We see the difficulty. We see the uncertainty. But God sees the entire story. He sees the future that lies ahead. He sees the paths you might take. He sees the consequences that those paths might lead to. And sometimes, in His wisdom, He steps in to fight battles that you are not even aware of. Battles that protect your purpose. Battles that guard your future. Battles that keep you from walking into something that could harm your life in ways you cannot yet imagine. The challenge for us is that faith requires trusting God even when we cannot see what He is doing. It requires believing that His guidance is working even when our circumstances seem confusing. It requires patience in moments when the answers have not yet appeared. But over time, many people begin to recognize a powerful truth. When they look back over the journey of their lives, they start to notice something remarkable. Moments they once considered failures turn out to be turning points. Closed doors become redirections. Disappointments become protection. And the struggles they once questioned often reveal themselves as battles that God was fighting all along. Battles that prevented something worse. Battles that guided them towards something better. So if you are walking through a season right now where life feels difficult, if you feel as though obstacles keep appearing in your path, if you feel as though something is standing between you and the life you hoped for, pause for a moment and consider a possibility that may change the way you see your situation. What if you are not fighting alone? What if the struggle you are experiencing is part of a battle that God is already handling? What if the reason things feel so complicated right now is because there is more happening behind the scenes than you realize? Because sometimes the most important battles in our lives are the ones we never see. And sometimes the reason you are still standing today is because God has been fighting for you in ways you could never imagine. There are seasons in life when everything seems to flow naturally. Plans come together. Opportunities appear at just the right moment. Relationships feel peaceful, and the future looks clear and hopeful. During those seasons, it is easy to believe that life will continue moving smoothly. We grow comfortable. We feel confident about where we are going. But then something unexpected happens. Without warning, life begins to change. Things that once worked effortlessly suddenly become difficult. Doors that seemed wide open begin to close. Plans that once felt certain start to fall apart. Small problems appear and quickly grow into larger obstacles. And slowly, a quiet question begins to form in our minds. Why is everything becoming so hard? This question has troubled people for centuries. It is one of the most common experiences in the human journey. At some point, everyone encounters a season where life feels heavier than usual. Sometimes these seasons arrive after a period of hope. Just when we believe we are moving forward, resistance appears. Delays emerge. Unexpected challenges interrupt the path we thought we understood. And when these moments arrive, it is easy to interpret them in the wrong way. Many people immediately assume that difficulty means they are moving in the wrong direction. They think, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should give up. Maybe this path was never meant for me. But the truth is not always so simple. In fact, throughout history, many of the people who walked closest with God experienced some of the greatest resistance. Their lives were not always easy. Their journeys were often filled with uncertainty. Yet those very struggles became part of a larger story. A story where God was working behind the scenes in ways that were invisible at the time. One of the surprising patterns we see in life is that resistance often appears when something important is about to happen. It is almost as if the closer someone moves toward their purpose, the more obstacles begin to appear. Think about moments when you were about to step into something meaningful. Perhaps a new opportunity, a new direction in life, a change that could shape your future. Often, those moments are accompanied by unexpected challenges, sudden doubts, unexplained setbacks, complications that seem to appear from nowhere. At first glance, these challenges can feel discouraging. They make progress seem impossible. But sometimes they are not simply random difficulties. Sometimes they are signs that something significant is taking place beneath the surface. The Bible reminds us that the world we see is not the only reality that exists. There are deeper spiritual dimensions that influence the events of our lives. Not every battle happens in the visible world. Some conflicts unfold quietly, beyond what our eyes can perceive. And when these invisible battles occur, their effects may appear in our circumstances. Delays may appear. Opposition may increase. Confusion may arise. But those visible challenges are often only the surface of a much deeper story. Imagine for a moment that someone is trying to move toward a meaningful purpose in their life. A purpose that could bring hope to others. A purpose that could change lives. If that purpose is important, it is not surprising that obstacles might appear along the way. Important things are rarely achieved without resistance. And sometimes the resistance we face is not simply the result of coincidence. Sometimes it is connected to battles we cannot see. This is why many spiritual teachers remind us that difficulty does not always mean we are on the wrong path. Sometimes difficulty appears precisely because we are moving in the right direction. The challenge is that from our limited perspective, we cannot always recognize the difference. When we encounter obstacles, we feel the frustration immediately. We see the closed doors. We experience the disappointment. We feel the weight of uncertainty. But we cannot see the deeper movements that may be unfolding behind the scenes. We cannot see the battles God may already be fighting on our behalf. We cannot see the protection that may already be surrounding our lives. Consider how often people later discover that a moment of difficulty actually protected them from something worse. A job opportunity that disappeared might have led to a harmful environment. A relationship that ended might have saved them from years of emotional pain. A delay that felt unbearable might have placed them in the right place at the right time later. At the moment those events occur, they rarely feel like protection. They feel like loss. They feel like frustration. But with time, perspective begins to change. What once seemed like an obstacle begins to look like guidance. What once seemed like a setback begins to look like preparation. And what once seemed like defeat sometimes reveals itself as a hidden victory. This pattern appears again and again in life. It is one of the quiet mysteries of faith. God often works in ways that are subtle and unseen. He does not always remove every obstacle immediately. Sometimes he allows us to walk through challenging seasons. But during those seasons, something deeper may be happening. Our character may be growing. Our faith may be strengthening. Our understanding of life may be expanding. And at the same time, God may be protecting us from dangers we never even notice. The problem is that when we are in the middle of a difficult season, we rarely see the full picture. We see only the immediate struggle. We see the confusion. We see the unanswered questions. But faith invites us to trust that there is more happening than we can perceive. It invites us to believe that God is still present in the moments that feel uncertain. And it reminds us that even when life becomes difficult, we are not necessarily walking alone. Because sometimes, when life suddenly becomes hard, it is not simply a sign of struggle. Sometimes it is the evidence that a deeper battle is taking place. A battle where forces beyond our understanding are moving. A battle where protection is already forming around our lives. A battle where God Himself may be standing between us and something we cannot yet see. And if that is true, then the obstacles we face today may not be the end of the story. They may simply be the visible signs of a much greater battle unfolding behind the scenes. A battle where God is already working long before we understand why. One of the most profound truths found in the Bible is that life is not limited to what our eyes can see. The physical world feels real because it is what we experience every day. We see the people around us. We see the challenges we face. We see the opportunities and the obstacles that appear in our path. Because of this, it is natural for us to believe that everything happening in our lives exists only within this visible world. But Scripture gently reminds us that reality is far deeper than that. There is another dimension to life, one that operates quietly beyond human sight. A spiritual dimension where forces move, decisions unfold, and battles take place long before their effects appear in our everyday circumstances. This idea can feel mysterious at first. After all, we cannot see these spiritual movements the way we see a storm in the sky or a mountain in the distance. Yet their influence is often present in ways we might not immediately recognize. Think about how many events in life seem to occur with strange timing. A meeting that happens at just the right moment. A path that unexpectedly changes direction. A decision that feels small at the time, but later shapes the course of an entire life. Sometimes we describe these moments as coincidences, but many people of faith believe they are more than coincidence. They are signs that something greater may be guiding the story of our lives. The Bible contains several moments when the unseen spiritual world briefly becomes visible. In one powerful story, a servant becomes terrified when he sees an enemy army surrounding the city where he lives. To him, the situation looks hopeless. Every road appears blocked. Every chance of escape seems gone. Fear fills his heart because all he can see is the physical reality around him. But the prophet standing beside him prays a simple prayer. He asks that God would open the servant's eyes. And suddenly the servant sees something he had never noticed before. The hills surrounding the city are filled with heavenly forces. What looked like a trap was actually a moment of protection. What appeared to be defeat was actually safety. The danger was real, but so was the unseen protection that surrounded them. This story reveals a truth that many people overlook. Just because something is invisible does not mean it is absent. There may be spiritual battles happening around us every day that we never realize are taking place. Battles over our direction. Battles over our future. Battles over the choices that shape our lives. These battles may influence the events we experience, but they are rarely visible in obvious ways. Instead, they appear through circumstances. A door suddenly closes. A delay appears. A situation changes unexpectedly. From our perspective, these moments can feel confusing or frustrating. We ask ourselves why things are happening this way. We search for logical explanations. But sometimes the reason lies deeper than we can immediately understand. Sometimes God is quietly working in ways that protect us from dangers we never even knew existed. Imagine if every moment of spiritual protection became visible to us. Imagine if we could see every time God redirected a path that would have led to harm. Imagine if we could witness every unseen danger that was removed before it ever reached our lives. If we could see all of those moments clearly, we might realize how often divine protection surrounds us. But because those events remain hidden, we often assume they never happened at all. This is why faith plays such an important role in the journey of life. Faith does not require us to understand every detail of what God is doing. Instead, it invites us to trust that His wisdom extends far beyond what we can see in the present moment. Faith reminds us that God's work is not limited to what appears obvious. Some of His most important actions occur quietly, behind the scenes. Sometimes He moves people into our lives at exactly the right time. Sometimes He removes situations that could harm us. Sometimes He closes doors that we were convinced we needed to walk through. At the time, those closed doors may feel like disappointments. They may even feel like unanswered prayers. But later, when we look back, we sometimes discover that those moments protected us from paths that would have led to pain. There is a fascinating pattern in many people's life stories. Years after a difficult moment, they suddenly realize that the event they once questioned actually saved them. A missed opportunity leads to a better one. A broken plan creates space for a more meaningful direction. A delay brings them to a place they would never have reached otherwise. These moments are reminders that the visible events of life are often only part of a much larger story. Behind every moment may be layers of guidance we cannot see, layers of protection we cannot measure, layers of spiritual activity unfolding beyond human awareness. This does not mean that life will always feel easy. Spiritual battles can still create real challenges in our daily experiences. There may still be moments of confusion, moments of waiting, moments where the answers we seek seem far away. But even during those seasons, the unseen work of God may still be unfolding. Think about how a seed grows beneath the soil. For a long time, nothing appears to be happening. The ground looks quiet and unchanged. But beneath the surface, roots are forming. Strength is developing. Preparation is taking place for the moment when new life finally appears above the soil. Spiritual battles often work in a similar way. Much of the movement happens where we cannot see it. Preparation takes place quietly. Protection develops silently. And when the right moment arrives, the results finally appear in ways that surprise us. The truth is that many of the most important battles in our lives may be fought long before we ever realize they existed. God may be redirecting a path, guarding a future, protecting a purpose, all while we continue walking forward without realizing the depth of what is happening around us. And this realization can change the way we see our struggles. Instead of assuming every difficulty means we are alone, we can begin to consider another possibility. Perhaps something greater is happening behind the scenes. Perhaps the challenges we face are connected to battles we cannot see. And perhaps, even in the moments when life feels uncertain, God is already fighting for us in ways that will only become clear with time. Throughout the Bible, there are many moments when people face situations that seemed impossible. From a human perspective, the outcome looked certain. Defeat seemed unavoidable. Fear seemed reasonable. But time and time again, something extraordinary happened. God stepped into the situation and fought battles that His people could not fight themselves. These moments reveal a powerful truth. God's protection does not always appear in obvious ways at the beginning. Often it becomes visible only at the last possible moment. One of the most well-known examples takes place when the people of Israel found themselves trapped between the sea and a powerful army. They had already left behind a life of oppression and were traveling toward freedom. But suddenly their path forward disappeared. Behind them, a massive army was approaching. Ahead of them was an uncrossable sea. From every visible angle, the situation looked hopeless. Fear quickly spread through the crowd. Some people began to panic. Others questioned why they had ever started the journey at all. It seemed like their story was about to end before it truly began. But what they could not see was that God was already preparing a way forward. The moment that looked like defeat was actually the moment when divine intervention would appear. At the right time, the path through the sea opened. What once looked like an impossible barrier became the road to freedom. The army that once seemed unstoppable suddenly lost its power. The battle that looked certain to destroy them had already been decided by God. This story is not just about a miracle in the past. It reveals a pattern that appears again and again throughout Scripture. God often waits until the moment when human strength is no longer enough. He allows circumstances to reach a point where it becomes clear that victory cannot come from human effort alone. And then, when hope seems to disappear, he reveals his power. Another powerful moment appears in the story of a young shepherd who faced a giant warrior. From the outside, the situation seemed almost absurd. The giant was heavily armed, trained for battle, and feared by an entire army. The young shepherd carried nothing more than simple tools used for protecting sheep. When people saw the giant, they saw a problem that could not be solved. When the shepherd saw the giant, he saw something different. He believed that God was greater than the threat standing before him. What many people forget about this moment is that the battle was not simply physical. The real battle had already been decided in the young man's faith. He trusted that God would stand with him. And in the end, the victory came in a way that no one expected. The giant who seemed unstoppable was defeated in a single moment. A battle that terrified an entire army was resolved by someone who trusted that God was fighting alongside him. Stories like this appear again and again in Scripture. There are moments when entire nations faced overwhelming danger. Moments when individuals were surrounded by enemies. Moments when people were placed in situations where survival seemed impossible. Yet in those moments, something remarkable often happened. God moved in ways that were unexpected. Sometimes the victory came through courage. Sometimes through wisdom. Sometimes through circumstances that changed suddenly and without explanation. But in every case, the outcome revealed the same truth. God had been working behind the scenes. He had been preparing the victory long before the people realized what was happening. This pattern is important because it reminds us that what we see in the present moment is rarely the entire story. When the people of Israel stood before the sea, they could not imagine how a path could appear. When the young shepherd stepped forward to face a giant, no one expected what would happen next. Yet the outcome of those battles showed that God had already been involved from the beginning. There is another powerful example that reveals how unseen protection works. A prophet once found himself surrounded by an enemy army during the night. His servant woke up and saw the soldiers surrounding the city. Fear immediately filled his heart. He believed that escape was impossible. But the prophet remained calm. He knew something the servant could not yet see. He prayed that God would open the servant's eyes. When that prayer was answered, the servant suddenly saw something astonishing. The hills surrounding them were filled with heavenly forces. They had not been alone. They had been protected the entire time. The battle that seemed terrifying from a human perspective had already been secured by forces greater than anything they could imagine. Moments like these reveal an important truth about faith. Often the most important battles in our lives are not the ones we fight with our own strength. They're the battles that God fights on our behalf. Battles that unfold quietly beyond what we can see. Battles that shape the direction of our lives long before we realize what is happening. Think about how many moments in life mirror these stories. There are times when we feel surrounded by problems. Moments when our future seems uncertain. Moments when obstacles appear larger than our ability to overcome them. But those moments do not always reveal the full picture. Just like the servant who feared the enemy army, we often see only the immediate situation. We see the challenge. We see the danger. We see the difficulty. But we cannot see the protection that may already exist beyond our awareness. We cannot see the unseen battles that God may already be fighting on our behalf. And sometimes, long after those moments pass, we begin to understand what truly happened. We look back and realize that something changed at just the right time. An unexpected opportunity appeared. A situation resolved itself in a surprising way. A path that once seemed blocked suddenly opened. In those moments, we begin to recognize a deeper pattern. The battle we feared may never have been ours to fight. God may have been handling it all along. This realization does not remove every challenge from life, but it does change the way we face those challenges. Instead of believing we must carry every burden alone, we begin to trust that something greater may be at work. Something that sees the dangers ahead. Something that knows how the story will unfold. Something that fights battles we cannot even see. And when we understand this truth, the struggles we face today begin to look different, because they may not simply be obstacles. They may be the visible signs of a battle that God is already winning. One of the hardest things for us to accept in life is that sometimes what feels like a loss may actually be protection. When a door closes, we naturally focus on what we lost. The opportunity that disappeared, the relationship that ended, the plan that no longer seems possible. Our minds often begin to replay the situation over and over again. We wonder what we could have done differently. We imagine how life might have looked if things had worked out the way we hoped. But there is another possibility that we rarely consider in those moments. What if the door closed because God saw something we could not see? What if the path you wanted to walk down was leading somewhere dangerous? What if the opportunity you were chasing would have slowly taken you away from the life you were meant to live? Because the truth is that our understanding of the future is extremely limited. We make decisions based on what we can see in the present moment. But God sees the entire story. He sees how every choice connects to the future. He sees the people we will meet. He sees the situations we will face. He sees the hidden consequences of every path. And because of that greater vision, He sometimes protects us in ways that do not make sense at first. Think about how often people later discover that something they once wanted would have led them into difficulty. A job that looked perfect on the surface might have placed them in a toxic environment. A relationship that seemed exciting at first might have brought years of emotional pain. A decision that appeared harmless might have slowly taken their life in the wrong direction. But because those situations never fully developed, the danger was never experienced. The protection happened quietly, without dramatic warnings. Without obvious signs. Just a closed door. Just a change of plans. Just a moment of disappointment. And at the time, it felt like something valuable had been taken away. But years later, the truth became clear. It had not been a loss. It had been protection. One of the fascinating things about life is that we often recognize God's protection only in hindsight. When we look back over our lives, patterns begin to appear. We see moments where something unexpected changed the direction of our story. We see moments where a delay led us to something better. We see moments where an ending created space for a new beginning. And slowly we begin to realize that the story of our lives has been guided in ways we did not fully understand at the time. There are also moments when protection happens in ways that we may never fully realize. Think about how many accidents never happen. How many harmful situations we never encounter. How many people we never meet. How many paths we never take. Every day, countless possibilities exist around us. Some of those possibilities could lead to wonderful experiences, but others could lead to situations that would harm us physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And yet we rarely think about the paths we never walked. We focus on the opportunities we missed rather than the dangers we avoided. But faith invites us to consider a different perspective. Perhaps many of the quiet redirections in our lives are not random at all. Perhaps they are moments where God is actively protecting us. Imagine if you could see every moment when God redirected your path. Every time He prevented you from stepping into a harmful situation. Every time He removed a person from your life who would have brought pain. Every time He delayed an opportunity because the timing was not right. If you could see all of those moments clearly, your understanding of life might change dramatically. You might realize that God's protection has been present far more often than you ever noticed. But because those moments happen quietly, they rarely draw attention to themselves. Protection often looks ordinary. A canceled meeting, a delayed plan, a closed opportunity, an unexpected change. Yet those small events may shape the direction of our lives in profound ways. Sometimes the battles God fights for us are not about defeating visible enemies. Sometimes they are about quietly removing dangers before we ever encounter them. And sometimes the greatest victories are the disasters that never happen. This realization can completely change the way we interpret the challenges we face. Instead of assuming every setback is meaningless, we can begin to ask a different question. What might God be protecting me from? This question shifts our perspective. Instead of focusing only on what we lost, we begin to consider what we might have avoided. Instead of assuming the story is ending, we begin to wonder if it is simply changing direction. And sometimes that new direction leads to something we never expected. A healthier relationship, a more meaningful purpose, a place where our gifts can truly make a difference. But those new possibilities often appear only after we release the path we originally planned. This is why faith requires patience. It requires the willingness to trust that God's guidance is leading somewhere meaningful, even when the destination is not yet clear. In many ways, trusting God is similar to trusting someone who can see farther down the road than we can. We may not understand every decision they make, but we believe that their perspective is greater than our own. And over time, as the story unfolds, we begin to understand why certain paths were closed and others were opened. Because sometimes the greatest expression of God's love is not giving us everything we ask for. Sometimes it is protecting us from things that would have hurt us in ways we cannot yet imagine. And when we begin to see life through that lens, the struggles we face today begin to feel different. They may still be difficult. They may still be confusing, but they are no longer meaningless. They may be the quiet evidence that God is still fighting battles for us, even the ones we cannot see. One of the greatest challenges in life is learning to trust God during seasons when we cannot see what He is doing. It is easy to trust when everything is clear, when doors open, when plans succeed, when life moves in the direction we hoped for. During those moments, faith feels natural. We feel confident that God is guiding our path. But trust becomes much more difficult when the situation changes, when prayers seem unanswered, when obstacles appear, when confusion replaces clarity. These are the moments when faith is truly tested. Because faith is not simply believing when everything makes sense. True faith is believing when nothing seems to make sense at all. It is the ability to trust that God is still working, even when the evidence is invisible. Think about how trust works in human relationships. When we deeply trust someone, we do not require them to explain every decision they make. We believe that they are acting with wisdom and care. Even when we do not understand their actions immediately, we assume there is a reason behind them. This kind of trust allows relationships to grow. Without trust, every situation becomes filled with doubt and fear. In our relationship with God, trust works in a similar way. There will always be moments when His actions are not immediately clear to us. There will be times when we ask questions that do not receive immediate answers. Moments when we wonder why certain doors closed or why certain opportunities disappeared. But faith invites us to believe that God's understanding is far greater than our own. He sees the future in ways we cannot. He sees the hidden details of situations we only partially understand. He sees how one decision today might shape events years into the future. Because of that greater perspective, He sometimes leads us through seasons that feel confusing at first. Seasons where progress seems slow. Seasons where answers feel distant. Seasons where we must simply continue walking forward without knowing exactly where the road will lead. These seasons can feel uncomfortable. Human beings naturally prefer certainty. We like clear plans. We like predictable outcomes. We like knowing what tomorrow will bring. But life rarely unfolds that way. Instead, the journey often requires us to move forward step by step, trusting that the path will eventually become clear. There is a powerful reason why faith grows during seasons of uncertainty. When everything is visible and predictable, trust is rarely tested. But when the path becomes unclear, we must decide whether we will continue believing that God is still guiding our lives. And in those moments, something remarkable often happens. Our faith becomes deeper. Our understanding of life becomes richer. Our relationship with God becomes more personal. Instead of relying only on what we can see, we begin to rely on something greater. We begin to rely on trust. Many people later look back at difficult seasons and realize that those moments were actually turning points in their lives. The struggles they once feared became the experiences that strengthened their character. The uncertainty they once questioned became the journey that led them to their true purpose. And the battles they once believed they were fighting alone turned out to be battles that God was already handling. But these realizations rarely appear in the middle of the struggle. They appear later, when time provides a clearer perspective. In the middle of the journey, trust often feels like walking through darkness. It feels like moving forward without knowing what lies ahead. But even in those moments, faith reminds us of an important truth. God does not abandon the battles that matter most. If He has placed a purpose within your life, He will not leave that purpose unprotected. There may be obstacles. There may be delays. There may be moments when progress feels impossible. But those moments do not mean that God has stepped away from the story. Often they are simply part of the process that shapes the final outcome. Imagine someone climbing a mountain during a thick fog. At times they cannot see the peak. They cannot see the full path ahead. They can only see the few steps directly in front of them. But if they continue walking, step by step, eventually the fog begins to lift. And when it does, they realize that they have come much farther than they ever expected. Trusting God during unseen battles is similar. We may not see the full plan. We may not understand every moment along the way. But by continuing to walk forward in faith, we allow the story to unfold in ways that we could never design ourselves. Over time, the path becomes clearer. The purpose becomes stronger. And the battles we once feared reveal themselves as moments where God was quietly protecting our future. This is why trust is one of the most powerful forces in the life of faith. Trust allows us to move forward even when we cannot see the full picture. It allows us to believe that God's work continues even when circumstances feel uncertain. And it reminds us that the battles we see are often only a small part of the battles that truly shape our lives. Because while we are focusing on the struggles in front of us, God may already be fighting battles we cannot see. Battles that protect our future. Battles that guard our purpose. Battles that ensure that the story of our lives continues moving toward the place we were meant to reach. And when we understand that truth, it becomes easier to trust the journey, even when the path ahead remains hidden. When battles are invisible, it can sometimes feel difficult to believe that they are truly happening. After all, we naturally trust what we can see. If help appears in a visible way, we recognize it immediately. If a problem disappears suddenly, we celebrate the solution. But when God works quietly behind the scenes, His protection may not always be obvious at first. Yet there are often subtle signs that something greater is at work in our lives. These signs do not always appear as dramatic miracles. More often, they show up in quiet and unexpected ways. And when we begin to notice them, we start to realize that we may not be walking through life alone. One of the most common signs that God is fighting for you is when a door closes that you were certain should have opened. At the moment it happens, the experience can feel deeply frustrating. You may have invested time, effort, and hope into something that suddenly disappears. The opportunity seems perfect. The timing feels right. But despite everything you do, the path forward simply will not open. At first, it feels like rejection. But sometimes, much later, you discover that the closed door protected you from a situation that would have brought pain or difficulty. What once felt like disappointment slowly begins to look like divine redirection. Another sign can appear through unexpected delays. Human beings naturally want progress to happen quickly. We want answers now. We want success without waiting. But there are moments when life slows down in ways we cannot control. Plans take longer than expected. Opportunities appear to pause. Progress seems delayed. These moments can feel discouraging. But sometimes the delay itself is part of God's protection. Timing can change everything. An opportunity that arrives too early might lead to failure. A decision made too quickly might lead to regret. But when the timing is right, the same opportunity may lead to success and growth. Delays may be frustrating in the present, but they often protect us from rushing into situations we are not yet ready to face. Another quiet sign appears when certain people unexpectedly leave our lives. Relationships play a powerful role in shaping the direction of our journey. The people we spend time with influence our thoughts, our decisions, and the paths we choose. Sometimes we become attached to relationships that feel important in the moment. But over time, we begin to realize that those connections may not have been healthy for our future. When someone leaves our life unexpectedly, the experience can feel painful. It can feel like abandonment or loss. But sometimes that separation creates space for healthier and more meaningful connections. God may remove people from our lives not as punishment, but as protection. Protection from influences that could quietly pull us away from the life we are meant to live. There are also moments when solutions appear in ways that seem almost impossible to predict. You may face a problem that feels overwhelming. The situation seems complicated, and no clear answer appears. But suddenly, an unexpected solution appears. A conversation happens at the right moment. A new idea forms. An opportunity emerges from a direction you never considered. These moments often feel like coincidences, but many people later recognize them as moments when God quietly guided events toward a solution. Another sign that God may be fighting battles for you is the presence of an inner sense of peace, even during difficult situations. Sometimes life becomes complicated and uncertain. Problems appear. Questions remain unanswered. Yet in the middle of that uncertainty, there is a quiet sense of calm inside you. A feeling that somehow things will work out. A sense that even though the path is unclear, you are not truly alone. This kind of peace does not always come from circumstances. It often comes from faith. It is the quiet reassurance that God is still present in the story. And sometimes that inner peace becomes the strength that carries us through seasons of waiting and uncertainty. There are also moments when we look back at our lives and suddenly recognize patterns we could not see before. We notice how certain events connected in ways that seemed impossible at the time. A missed opportunity led to a better one. A closed door led to a new direction. A painful ending opened the door to a new beginning. These patterns often reveal something remarkable. God was guiding the story all along, not always in ways that were obvious in the moment, but in ways that slowly shaped the direction of our lives toward something better. When we begin to recognize these signs, our perspective changes. Instead of assuming that every obstacle is a failure, we start to see that some obstacles may actually be protection. Instead of believing that every delay is a problem, we begin to see that some delays may be preparation. Instead of fearing that we are alone in our struggles, we begin to believe that something greater may be fighting for us. And that belief changes the way we face the future. Because when we trust that God is working behind the scenes, we no longer feel as though every battle depends entirely on our strength. We can move forward with faith. We can continue walking even when the path ahead is not fully visible. And we can trust that the unseen battles of today may become the hidden victories of tomorrow. There is something fascinating about the way life reveals its meaning. When we are living through difficult moments, everything can feel confusing. We see the struggle. We feel the disappointment. We carry the weight of questions that seem to have no clear answers. In those moments, it is easy to believe that our story is falling apart. It is easy to assume that the obstacles we face are simply random events with no deeper meaning. But life has a way of revealing its truths slowly. Often, the understanding we search for today appears only years later. A moment that once felt like failure suddenly makes sense. A door that once closed painfully reveals itself as protection. A delay that once felt unbearable becomes the very reason we were ready for something greater. And when people look back over the journey of their lives, many discover something remarkable. They begin to notice that certain moments were not accidents at all. They were turning points. Moments where something unseen quietly changed the direction of the story. Perhaps a job opportunity disappeared, forcing them to move in a new direction that eventually led to a more meaningful purpose. Perhaps a relationship ended, creating space for a healthier and more supportive connection later in life. Perhaps a plan collapsed completely, only for a better path to appear when they least expected it. At the time, those moments felt painful. They felt confusing. They felt like the end of something important. But later, they revealed themselves as something very different. They were moments of hidden protection. Moments where God was quietly fighting battles that no one else could see. Battles that prevented something harmful. Battles that redirected a life toward something better. When we understand this truth, our perspective begins to shift. Instead of seeing every obstacle as a sign that we are alone, we begin to see the possibility that something greater may be happening behind the scenes. The struggles we face today may not be the final chapter of our story. They may simply be part of the process that shapes what comes next. Think about how many moments in your own life have already revealed this pattern. Moments where something did not work out the way you hoped. Moments where you questioned why events were unfolding the way they were. Moments where the future felt uncertain. Yet somehow, with time, the path forward appeared. Solutions emerged. New opportunities arrived. The story continued in ways that you could not have predicted. And slowly, you began to understand that the difficult moment you once feared had actually guided you somewhere meaningful. This is one of the quiet miracles of faith. It reminds us that our perspective is limited. We see only the present moment. But God sees the entire story. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the future that lies ahead. He sees the dangers that never reach us. He sees the opportunities that are still on their way. And he sees the battles that must be fought to protect the purpose placed within our lives. Sometimes those battles happen quietly. Sometimes they unfold in ways that we will never fully understand. but their results shape the journey of our lives in ways that matter deeply. The truth is that many of the victories that protect your life may be victories you never witness. Moments where God stepped in without announcing his presence. Moments where something dangerous was quietly removed from your path. Moments where a different direction was chosen for you before you even realized the danger ahead. And because those moments happen silently, they often go unnoticed. We move forward with our lives without realizing how often we have been protected. But one day, when the story of your life becomes clearer, you may begin to see those moments differently. You may realize that certain doors had to close, certain paths had to change, certain delays had to happen, because those moments were part of a larger plan that was unfolding all along. A plan designed not only to guide your life, but also to protect it. So if you are walking through a season right now where things feel uncertain, if you feel as though obstacles keep appearing in your path, if you are struggling to understand why certain doors have closed, take a moment to remember this truth. The battles you see are not the only battles that exist. There may be unseen battles unfolding around you even now. Battles where God is protecting your future. Battles where he is guiding your direction. Battles where he is quietly working to ensure that the story of your life continues moving towards something meaningful. And one day, perhaps sooner than you expect, you may look back on this very season of your life and realize something extraordinary. The struggles that once made you feel alone were actually moments where God was standing beside you all along, fighting battles you never saw, protecting paths you never knew existed, and guiding your life toward a future that was always greater than you could imagine. Because sometimes the greatest victories in life are the ones that happen quietly, the ones that take place beyond what human eyes can see. And sometimes the reason you are still standing today is because God has been fighting for you all along.